Tomorrow is my 18th birthday, and I'll be moving out and going no contact with my family. Tomorrow I will finally become an adult, at least by US law, and I will be moving into my girlfriend's uncle's guest house for the remainder of my senior year of high school before college. My hope is to never talk to my family again. Why, you ask? The catalyst for this move really starts at my conception. My bio dad left my mom the minute she found out she was pregnant. She had me and was immediately a single mom. She met Ted, and they moved in when I was 2. He also had a son, Mark, who was 2. This is where the second problem emerges. While Mark's bio mom died, mine was still alive. So my mom adopted Mark almost immediately after marriage, but Ted never adopted me. They decided to force my bio dad to pay child support. They also had my half-sister a year later. So everyone in the family has Ted's last name, except me. I have my mother's maiden name. You'll notice I call my mom's husband Ted instead of Dad. That wasn't always the case. I called him Dad for almost my entire life, because he was the only father figure I ever knew. But there were always small issues that made him different from a normal dad. When we were at family events, my mom would refer to both Mark and I as her sons, but Ted always corrected and said I was his adopted son, while Mark was his real son. Mark and my half-sister Grace would get special 1:1 time with Ted, but I never did. This got significantly worse as school progressed. I don't know how to say this without coming across as an ass, but I'm just significantly smarter than Mark. It's just a fact. While he struggles to get BS in classes I got as in honors and AP classes, honestly with very little effort. School was easy for me, and it showed in my report card. When this became noticeable in middle school, it began to eat at Ted. I was a little young to notice it, but looking back it's so obvious. When report cards came out, Ted would shower Mark and Grace with praise, but mine was always met with jokes about how I could sleep through class and still get an A. Every compliment from Ted was always couched in a joke. At one point, Ted wanted to limit how much money they gave me for A's versus Mark, but Mom put a stop to it. But she never put a stop to Ted and Mark's 1:1 time, always leading to a larger purchase than I received in report card money. As we got older, Ted spent a lot of time bonding with Mark and Grace, and little to none with me. My mom never did this with me, or, in fairness, with any of the kids. She always liked hanging with us all together as a family. When I was 15 and Mark and Ted were going on a camping trip. By this point, I was fully aware that I was treated differently and kind of wanted an explanation. So I had been prodding to join. Finally, on the day of the trip, I kind of blew up and told him it's unfair that I couldn't join. Ted took me aside and said that while he loved me, it was different. He needed to bond with his real children separate from the family, and that I should try and get my mom to do bonding experiences with just her and I. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but this conversation broke me. After they left, I talked to my mom about it, and this somehow got worse. My mom knew and acknowledged that he acted this way, and said she always ensured I got treated fairly when it came to money. She said he was most of the way to a father figure, and I needed to figure out how to deal with it and be thankful for what he did for me. I was shattered. When Ted returned, I stopped referring to him as Dad. In my family's eyes, this is where the problem started. For me, this was the culmination of their actions, but for the family, I was ungrateful. My mom begged me to look at the bigger picture, but I refused. For the next 4-ish months, I referred to him as Ted. Then around Christmas, I'm 16 at this point, I get home from work and the entire family is seated in the living room waiting for me. It was really weird. They called it an intervention, and all discussed how calling Ted by his first name hurt the family. Ted started talking about how it pained him and how he had always tried to be a good father figure to me. My mom talked about all he had done for me. Mark discussed how ungrateful I was and how angry he was at me. Grace cried and said she wanted her family back and how I was destroying the family. This hurt. I loved Grace, and while she was a daddy's girl, she always acknowledged that Ted treated me differently. If I lost Grace, I lost everyone. I asked if I could speak, and they said yes. And I discussed how he treated me differently, how I was the only one with a different last name, and how I felt like an outsider. I started to cry, and no one came to comfort me. Ted had the audacity to say, "See, this change is killing you inside. You don't have to be an outsider. rejoin the family. Even my mom and Grace nodded in agreement. I couldn't believe it. It didn't happen that day, but slowly I started calling him Dad again, just to keep the peace, but it never felt right, and I never forgave them. I had a lot of suicidal feelings. I spent months just dreaming of ending it. One day at work, I was discussing how shitty Ted was, and a coworker, Jenny, suggested I start saving to move out. She said once you turn 18, you could get a place on your own. It was a great idea and started working and saving, preparing for what I finally get to do tomorrow. Jenny and I started dating, and an apartment eventually turned into our uncle's guest house. He had been looking for a new tenant, and I was able to give him 10 months rent up front. That gets me through the school year to college. I've slowly been moving out without anyone noticing. Tomorrow, while they are all at church, I'm going to grab my bed and the final items that I'm taking. I will also be leaving a note for my mom telling her I hope I can forgive her in time, but right now my anger toward her is at a boiling point. I know that leaving will end all financial support, but honestly, if Jenny hadn't suggested moving out, I'm not sure I would have made it. I was starting to get very specific in my plan to end it. I don't know if she's the one, or if we'll even date past high school. She's staying local for college, and I need to leave. But I couldn't have done this without her, and I'll always love her for her help and encouragement. I'll try and update with how I'm doing after the move is finalized. Wish me luck. Update 1. Sorry it's been so long since my original post. I had really meant to update you all right after I moved out, but life got hectic, as you can imagine. First, a piece of advice for anyone with similar intentions. Maybe wait and do it a week after you turn 18, so you can open a bank account that doesn't have your parents attached. You'll see why here in a minute. I'm going to try and do this chronologically, but some of this happened almost a year ago. So after I moved out Sunday during church, Jenny and I hung out and celebrated my birthday. She took me to the movies. They were showing Punch Drunk Love, my favorite movie. She suffered through it for me. She's so great. Then we went for an early dinner. It was during this dinner that my phone started to blow up, mostly from Grace. She was the only one I didn't block, but also my aunt, who I hadn't seen in 3 years. Grace said Mom was crying after reading my letter, and Ted was angry. I asked if he had called me a bastard yet, and Grace stopped responding. Something I didn't mention in my last post and used to really piss me off is that Ted got really mad about me in a conversation with my mother. He would call me a bastard. I know they all heard it. My mom usually told him to stop, but after I started calling him by his first name, it got worse. Mark started doing it at school. But I digress. My aunt kept calling, and I finally picked up, but never let her speak. I told her I was never going back to a house where I was treating like an unwanted, unloved burden, and hung up. Then blocked her number. After that, things went silent for the rest of the day. School on Monday was difficult. Grace knew where I parked since I normally drove her to school, and she was waiting at my parking spot. She said I had ruined the family, and both my parents were hurt. I didn't say a word and started walking into the school. She kept asking me how I could leave without a word and talk to her. I snapped. I told her I loved her, but said I wouldn't have a conversation. She kept going, so I said, tell me how many times he called me a bastard, and I'll give you 5 minutes. 7. I froze. No idea if she was making it up or not, but acknowledging her daddy could do anything wrong was a huge step. I gave her 5 minutes. And definitely told her too much. I told her that she would never understand what I went through because she was Ted's real kid. That I was never equal and was never loved. That I was, at best, a fifth wheel in your perfect little family. That if she really loved me, she'd understand why I couldn't go back. She just started bawling. And let me tell you, a senior making a freshman bawl got the attention of many teachers. It wasn't long before I was in the assistant principal's office and then the guidance counselor. It was the 3rd period before I was even allowed to go to class. It was the talk of the school by lunch. Teachers would look at me sympathetically, but no one really acknowledged it until Wednesday. I was in AP Calc and the guidance counselor called asking me to go to her office. I told my teacher no, I'd rather stay here. The whole class looked at me. She looked me in the eyes and said I was going to have to deal with it at some point, acknowledging without saying that at least one of them was in the office, as I suspected. I walked to the guidance counselor's office, and she was waiting for me outside her office. She let me know my parents were here and we were going to have a talk about my future. I opened my mouth to say something, but she was better prepared than Monday. She just held up her hand and told me to come in. My mom and Ted were already there, sitting side by side on her couch. I picked the chair farthest away and refused to acknowledge anyone. The counselor started with saying that everyone was in agreement that we needed to chat to figure everything out. I interjected. Everything is figured out, I've moved out, and I don't want to talk with them. Ted couldn't help himself. What about insurance, huh? What are you going to do when you're not on your mom's plan? Already have it through my work. He wasn't expecting me to have thought of that. What are you going to do in an emergency? My mom piped in. I have some money saved, I say. You had money saved. She acted like she was correcting me. No, I have over $8,000 in my account. Again, Mom corrected. You had over $8,000 in our account. I looked at her, then grabbed my phone and opened the account. There was only $27 in it. How could you? We deducted the cost of the stuff you took, Ted interjected. Before you know it, I was screaming, Ted was screaming. Not my proudest moment, but I was on my feet screaming, trying to get Ted to call me a bastard. But he didn't. When it was over, the assistant principal and 2 admins were in there breaking me and Ted apart along with my mom. I was livid. I looked at my mom, didn't say anything, and went back to class. I had no idea what I was going to do, but when I got to my car at the end of the day, Grace and my mom were waiting for me. My mom put her hand up as I started again and said, you can have it all back if you go to 3 family therapy appointments. I'll put $1,000 back after the first 2, and then the rest back after the 3rd. She had me in a corner, and she knew it. Fine, I said. Tell Grace to let me know when the appointments are. The first therapy appointment was terrible. The therapist asked each of us for our goals. I asked to go last. My mom and Grace both said they wanted the family back together. Mark wanted me to be grateful for all his dad did, and Ted said he wanted me to acknowledge all the stuff he did for me. This one really pissed me off, so when it was my turn, I decided to throw any hope of reconciliation and said I wanted Ted and Mark to stop calling me a bastard. It went just as I anticipated. Screaming, crying, and all of them blaming me. The next 2 weren't any better. Nothing got resolved. They pleaded with me to continue, but once the money was in my account, I transferred it to my new bank and cut contact again. Things were pretty normal until Christmas. Jenny had posted a picture of me with her family on Christmas morning, and it made my mother go a tad overboard. The day after Christmas, she banged on my door and refused to leave until I spoke to her. When I opened it, she was crying and handed me my present and a letter. The present was the Criterion Collection copy of The Master. What can I say? I love P.T. Anderson, and the letter was heartfelt. She acknowledged that Ted had never embraced me like she embraced Mark, that it was his biggest flaw, but that she can't figure out why I can't get past it. He's a great guy. She actually said that to me. It just further cemented my belief that my mom needed him for her. She needed to be with a man. That's fine, but she chose one that hurt me, repeatedly. She has to live with the consequences of that. I can't imagine we'll ever have a relationship again. She continued to show up to my tennis matches and events. She somehow found out when I got accepted into Columbia and sent another letter congratulating me. Grace kept trying to get me to come home for family dinner, but I never did. Then when I was told in April that I was valedictorian, the entire family showed up Friday night to throw me a party. They even forced Mark to be there. I was furious. Jenny was my rock through all of this. I'm not sure she ever fully understood, but she accepted all of my emotional moments. When she got into UCLA, that's where I knew I was going as well. Not sure her dad is happy she is moving so far away, but she asked me to join her, and I was more than happy to do that. What made me think to post, though, was my valedictorian speech. I knew I wanted to talk about how the measure of a human being is about what they do when they have power. As I thought about Ted and where he failed because he had all the power over my well-being and used it immorally. I couldn't just call him out, though. I had to make it universal. So it went. The measure of who you are is what you do when you have power. Now, power isn't just money and status. Next year, when you are at college and your roommate is struggling where you are thriving, you have power when you are a step-parent responsible for the emotional health of a child. You have power when you ride the bus and see someone uncomfortable with the system. You have power. How you act in those moments is the measure of who you are. When the graduation was over, Jenny's parents congratulated me on a great speech. I don't think many noticed my subtle jab. But Linda and Ted did. Yes, my mom is Linda now. She came up to me and told me she was so embarrassed and sad about my speech that I had no reason to call out my father like that. I smiled and said, "Okay, Linda," and then walked away. Jenny and I leave for LA next week. I received a scholarship that brought my fees down to below in-state tuition levels. Nearly a full ride. I don't need them, and in fairness, I don't think they need me either. I am having lunch with Grace before I leave. I feel terrible for how this has impacted her. My only regret. Update 2. I can't believe college is almost over already. Time just flies by. So, before I begin with what has happened with my family, I should start with the fact that Jenny and I are engaged. We really had a tough time our freshman year. We both went into college as film majors like people who had no care for money, but by Christmas we had swapped to economics for me and computer science for Jenny. I think us both changing and becoming new people while trying to maintain relationships in the dorms was too much for us. We nearly broke up right before she returned home for Christmas break. We said we wouldn't call each other, but she called when Linda showed up looking for me at the house on Christmas Eve. She was just informing me, but I broke down crying and told her I missed her and loved her. Embarrassing, but she was touched and actually came back early to celebrate New Year's, and we took a short trip to Santa Monica and really rekindled. We started living together sophomore year and have never looked back. Now on to my family. College was very stressful for me. I had to maintain at least 25 hours of work per week to keep insurance. Of course, Linda and Ted never gave me my college fund, and I didn't blame them. I cut them off. I had no right to their money. Still made it difficult, though. I ran through my savings freshman year, and Jenny agreed to live with me our next 3 years, and her parents covering 75% of the rent was the only way I survived. When I moved to LA, I changed phone numbers and changed my last name. I wanted no connection to Linda. Grace wasn't blocked on social media, though, so I think this was just emotional and symbolic. Grace was pretty hurt with my behavior. Right before I left for UCLA, she asked to talk and begged me to make up with my parents and be part of the family again. I gave her a big hug and said she was always part of my family and could reach out anytime, but Linda, Ted, and Mark were not family, and I got to decide that. In March of my freshman year, Linda and Grace came to LA for their spring break, and Grace was able to find me. Honestly, pretty impressive. She was able to find the correct Starbucks based on like 2 Instagram posts. They pleaded again for me to make up. We sat outside, and they just kept talking and tearing up, telling me that I was still in the family and that if I just apologized to Ted, he would be fine. I couldn't take it anymore. Once they had tired themselves out and went silent, I asked if I was supposed to talk now. I asked if they wanted to know what my plan was to kill myself when I was 16. I went into detail about how I knew they would be happier without me and exactly how I would do it, down to the time of day and what I would eat beforehand. I told them how I did dry runs, and had Jenny not suggested an alternative, I would have gone through with it. Before they could really come down and talk after their reaction, I got up and left where we were sitting and drove back to my dorm. They were at Starbucks the next day. Clearly still a mess from yesterday. They went shopping around and waited until I got off. Linda really wanted to talk about why I never discussed this in the therapy appointments and why I kept it bottled in. I told her that it was clear from Ted's treatment of me and her tolerance of it that I was never loved by any of you. If Jenny ever calls one of our kids a bastard, she'd be divorced the same day, but you let him do it over and over again. I told her she made her choice and I've made mine. I gave Grace a hug and looked at Linda and begged her not to contact me again. I knew how to get in touch with her and would if I ever forgave her. But right now I needed space that saw her pained me. Grace came out by herself every spring break, and I make a point to see her when I come up to Christmas with Jenny's family. She was here last month and helped me propose to Jenny. We text almost every day, and we've grown much closer. Linda has not contacted me, true to her word, but Grace does tell me that she keeps her updated on my life. This is where you all may be mad at me. I sent a letter to Linda saying that I was building toward forgiveness, that I thought it would be okay if she came to the wedding, but that Ted and Mark were not invited. We'll see if she can follow through. If she can, Then maybe we start to rebuild. If Ted shows up, we'll kick them out and never contact them again. Oh, also, Jenny got a job in San Francisco, and I got accepted into UC Berkeley's graduate economics program and started in August. So, another move. We plan to get married back home next summer after a year in SF. We're very excited. Until next time.